I'm Sarah, 32, and I thought I knew what family loyalty meant until last Thanksgiving when my sister Jessica destroyed me in front of everyone I loved. Where's your husband and kids, Sarah? Oh right, you don't have any because you're too selfish and career-obsessed, she laughed while carving the turkey. My parents joined in, chuckling like it was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. That moment shattered everything I believed about unconditional family love. What they didn't know was that I'd been secretly supporting them all financially for years, and I was about to discover something that would flip our entire family dynamic forever. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this wild family drama that literally changed my entire perspective on blood loyalty, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. And if you're ready for a story about family betrayal, sweet revenge, and the most satisfying karma moment ever, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this journey gets absolutely insane. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for the twist that nobody, not even me, saw coming. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. While Jessica partied through college on our parents' dime, I worked 3 jobs to pay my own way through business school. My parents constantly praised her for being fun and spontaneous, while treating my achievements like they were just expected. When I graduated summa cum laude and landed a 6-figure job at a consulting firm, Mom's response was, "That's nice, dear." Jessica just got accepted to graduate school in art therapy. The pattern continued into our 20s. Jessica bounced between creative projects, never holding a steady job, while I climbed the corporate ladder. Every family gathering became a showcase of her latest artistic endeavor, while my professional milestones were glossed over. When I bought my first house at 25, Dad spent dinner talking about Jessica's pottery class. When I got promoted to senior consultant, Mom interrupted my news to show everyone Jessica's latest painting. But the real kicker? I'd been quietly helping them all financially for years. Dad lost his job during the 2020 recession, and Mom's part-time work at the library barely covered groceries. Without them knowing, I'd been paying their mortgage, car payments, and credit card bills. I set up automatic transfers disguised as investment returns from Dad's old 401k. They believed they were living off smart financial planning when really, their ungrateful daughter was keeping them afloat. Jessica knew about their financial struggles, but never offered to help. Instead, she'd complain about her own money problems, usually right before asking Dad for a small loan that never got repaid. She lived in a trendy downtown apartment that I later discovered was partially subsidized by our parents, money that was ultimately coming from me. The irony was suffocating, but I kept quiet because I loved them and thought family meant unconditional support. The criticism about my single status started subtly. Little comments about biological clocks and finding balance between career and personal life. Jessica, who'd never maintained a relationship longer than 6 months, somehow became the family expert on love and commitment. She'd bring different guys to family events, introducing them as the one before ghosting them within weeks. Yet somehow, I was the one with relationship problems because I chose to focus on building a stable career first. My parents enabled this narrative completely. They'd ask Jessica's opinion on everything from home renovations to investment decisions, treating her scattered lifestyle choices like wisdom while dismissing my actual expertise in business and finance. When I offered professional advice about their refinancing options, Dad would say, "Well, let's see what Jessica thinks." She'd inevitably suggest something completely impractical, and they'd nod like she'd solved world peace. The emotional manipulation was constant but subtle. Family photos somehow always featured Jessica prominently while I was cropped to the edges. Holiday cards went out with messages about Jessica's latest adventures. When relatives asked about me, the conversation quickly shifted to Jessica's more interesting lifestyle. I became the family's successful but somehow disappointing afterthought. What hurt most was watching Jessica take credit for family stability she'd never contributed to. She'd brag about helping our parents through tough times, conveniently forgetting that her help consisted of emotional support while mine involved actual financial rescue. She painted herself as the devoted daughter while positioning me as the cold, career-obsessed sister who'd chosen success over family bonds. I told myself it didn't matter because I was secure in my choices. I had a beautiful home, financial independence, and a career I loved. But deep down, the constant undermining was eating away at my self-worth. Every family gathering became an endurance test where I had to smile while being subtly torn down by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. That Thanksgiving was supposed to be different. I'd planned to finally tell them about a serious relationship I'd been keeping private, someone wonderful who understood my ambitions. Instead, Jessica decided to make me the evening's entertainment, and our parents joined the show. The 2023 Thanksgiving dinner started like any other family gathering, with me arriving early to help Mom while Jessica showed up fashionably late with a store-bought dessert she'd claimed she made from scratch. I'd spent the morning preparing side dishes and listening to Mom gush about Jessica's latest breakthrough in her art therapy practice. According to Mom, Jessica was really finding herself and making such a difference in people's lives, never mind that she'd been finding herself for the past decade. Dad was in his usual pre-dinner mood, slightly stressed about carving the turkey perfectly and making sure everything looked good for his daughters. He'd always put pressure on himself to be the perfect host, something I inherited and Jessica completely ignored. She breezed in wearing a designer dress I later realized cost more than most people's monthly rent, kissing everyone hello while I finished setting the table she was supposed to help prepare. The conversation started innocuously enough. Jessica regaled us with stories about her clients, carefully maintaining confidentiality while somehow making every story about her own insights and breakthroughs. Mom and Dad hung on every word like she was delivering a TED Talk instead of recounting basic therapy sessions. When they asked about my work, I mentioned a recent promotion to regional director, a massive achievement that came with a corner office and significant salary increase. "That's great, honey," Mom said absently, already turning back to Jessica. "Tell us more about that client who had the breakthrough about their childhood trauma." The dismissal stung, but I was used to it. I focused on enjoying the meal I'd largely prepared and tried to appreciate being with family. That's when Jessica decided to go nuclear. "You know what I love about family dinners," she said, gesturing with her wine glass. "Everyone's here, sharing their lives, their happiness. Well, almost everyone." She looked directly at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sarah, you never talk about your personal life anymore. Are you seeing anyone special? Planning any exciting life changes?" The question felt loaded, but I tried to answer diplomatically. "I'm focusing on my career right now. There's plenty of time for other things later." Jessica's smile turned predatory. "Other things? You mean like the things that actually matter? Love, family, children? The things that make life worth living instead of just accumulating money and titles." Mom chimed in with what she probably thought was helpful. "Jessica's right, dear. You work so hard, but don't you want more? Don't you want someone to share your success with? And grandchildren would be so wonderful." "I'm only 32, I said, feeling defensive despite myself. "Plenty of women have children in their 30s and 40s now." That's when Jessica went for the kill. She set down her wine glass and looked around the table like she was about to deliver a punchline everyone had been waiting for. "Where's your husband and kids, Sarah?" "Oh right, you don't have any because you're too selfish and career-obsessed to make room for anyone else in your perfect little world." The silence that followed felt eternal. Then Dad started chuckling, actually chuckling. Like Jessica had made a clever observation instead of a vicious personal attack. Mom joined in with nervous laughter, the kind that said she thought Jessica was being a bit harsh, but fundamentally accurate. "Jessica, that's not very nice," Mom said, but she was still smiling. "Though I do worry that Sarah's missing out on the best parts of life." "I'm just saying what we're all thinking," Jessica continued, emboldened by their reaction. "Some people are meant to be the fun aunt, and some people are meant to actually live full lives. There's nothing wrong with being career-focused, Sarah. Not everyone can handle real responsibility like relationships and children." The condescension in her voice was overwhelming. Here was my sister, who'd never held a steady job, never paid her own bills consistently, never contributed anything meaningful to our family's stability, lecturing me about responsibility and life choices. And our parents were eating it up. Maybe if you loosened up a little, put yourself out there more, you'd find someone, Dad offered, as if my single status was purely due to personality defects. You're a catch, sweetheart, but men can be intimidated by very successful women. You might need to dial back the intensity. I sat there, stunned, as my entire family dissected my life choices like I wasn't even present. They questioned my priorities, my personality, my future, all while praising Jessica for her balanced approach to life. The woman who'd never balanced a checkbook was lecturing me about balance. What they didn't know was that upstairs in my purse, I had a small velvet box. David had proposed 3 weeks earlier, and I'd been planning to announce our engagement at dinner. He was everything they claimed I'd never find, successful but not threatened by my ambition, kind, funny, and completely supportive of my goals. We'd been dating for 2 years, but I'd kept the relationship quiet because I wanted to be sure before introducing him to my family's particular brand of judgment. Instead of celebrating my engagement, I watched my family tear me apart while defending the sister who was bleeding them dry financially without their knowledge. The irony was so complete it took my breath away. I excused myself early, claiming work in the morning. As I gathered my coat, I heard Jessica stage whisper to Mom, "I hope she finds someone before it's too late. It would be so sad if she ended up alone with just her career." Mom's response was the final nail in the coffin. Maybe this will be a wake-up call for her. Sometimes people need to hear hard truths. Driving home from that disaster of a Thanksgiving dinner, I couldn't stop replaying the scene. The casual cruelty, the unanimous agreement that my life was somehow lacking, the complete dismissal of everything I'd accomplished, it all felt surreal. But what bothered me most was the underlying assumption that Jessica had somehow figured out life, while I'd failed at the basics of human connection. That assumption haunted me because I knew it was built on lies. Jessica's life wasn't the balanced, authentic existence my parents admired. She was barely scraping by financially, constantly borrowing money, and her relationship pattern suggested someone running from commitment, not embracing it. Yet somehow, she'd positioned herself as the family expert on living meaningfully while I was painted as a cold, career-obsessed workaholic. The next morning, I called David to tell him about the dinner. He was furious, especially when I explained how they'd mocked the very life choices that had led me to him. "They don't deserve to know about our engagement yet," he said. "Not until they can appreciate who you actually are instead of who they think you should be." His support meant everything, but it also crystallized something important. My family didn't really know me at all. That realization started me thinking about what else they might not know. If they could be so wrong about my personal life, what else were they missing? I decided to dig deeper into Jessica's supposedly perfect life, starting with the financial reality behind her carefree lifestyle. My business background had taught me to follow money trails, and Jessica's trail was fascinating. Her art therapy practice was real but minimal, maybe 10 clients maximum, most paying reduced rates or bartering services. Her downtown apartment cost $2,800 monthly, more than her entire documented income. Yet somehow she was always traveling, buying expensive clothes, and treating our parents to dinners at upscale restaurants. I started with public records. Jessica had filed for bankruptcy 3 years earlier, something our parents had never mentioned. The filing showed debts from credit cards, student loans, and 2 personal loans from banks. All had been discharged, giving her a clean slate she'd apparently used to accumulate new debt. Her social media told another story. Instagram and Facebook showed a carefully curated lifestyle of yoga retreats, weekend getaways, and expensive restaurants. But looking closer, I noticed patterns. The yoga retreats were always gifted experiences, with suspicious hashtags suggesting promotional partnerships. The restaurants were group events where someone else was always tagged as the host. The weekend getaways were often to friends' family properties, not paid accommodations. The deeper I dug, the more elaborate the facade became. Jessica had mastered the art of living beyond her means while making it look effortless. She'd cultivated relationships with people who could provide access to experiences she couldn't afford, traded services for goods, and leveraged her charm to maintain a lifestyle completely disconnected from her actual earning power. But the real revelation came when I started tracking the loans from our parents. Over the past 5 years, they'd given Jessica over $47,000 in documented transfers, plus countless undocumented cash gifts, bill payments, and emergency bailouts. Money that was ultimately coming from me through my secret financial support. I created a spreadsheet tracking every transaction. The pattern was consistent. Jessica would have a crisis. Our parents would panic about their inability to help, and then mysteriously find the funds to bail her out. They thought they were being good parents, sacrificing their own financial security for their struggling daughter. In reality, they were redistributing my money without my knowledge or consent. The manipulation was sophisticated. Jessica timed her crises perfectly, usually when our parents had just received one of their mysterious investment returns. She'd present problems as temporary emergencies that just needed quick solutions, promising repayment that never materialized. Our parents, feeling generous with their unexpected windfall, would happily help their creative daughter pursue her dreams. Meanwhile, I was working 60-hour weeks to maintain the income level necessary to support not just myself, but my entire family's lifestyle. Every promotion I earned, every successful project I completed, was partly motivated by the hidden responsibility of keeping my family financially stable. And my reward was being mocked for prioritizing career over relationships. The financial investigation led me to an even more disturbing discovery. Jessica hadn't just been taking money from our parents, she'd been actively undermining my reputation to maintain her position as the favored daughter. Through careful social media analysis and some conversations with family friends, I discovered she'd been spreading subtle narratives about my priorities and personality for years. She'd tell people I was obsessed with money and couldn't relate to normal people anymore. She'd share concerns about my workaholic tendencies and wonder aloud if success had changed me for the worse. She positioned herself as the concerned sister trying to help our parents understand their difficult daughter who'd gotten too big for her britches. The strategy was brilliant and devastating. By constantly raising gentle concerns about my well-being and values, she'd primed everyone to see my success as problematic rather than admirable. When I didn't share details about my personal life, it became evidence of my emotional unavailability. When I worked long hours, it proved I'd lost perspective on what mattered. Every positive trait was reframed as a character flaw through Jessica's careful commentary. Our parents had absorbed these narratives completely. They genuinely worried about me, not because there was anything wrong with my life, but because Jessica had convinced them there was. They saw her criticism as loving concern and joined in because they thought it would help me find balance and happiness. The realization that my entire family's perception of me had been systematically distorted by my manipulative sister was almost more painful than the financial betrayal. Money could be recovered, but years of damaged relationships and undermined self-worth would take much longer to heal. As I compiled evidence of Jessica's true character and her campaign against me, I felt something shifting inside. The hurt and confusion from Thanksgiving were crystallizing into something sharper and more focused. If Jessica wanted to play games with family dynamics and financial manipulation, she was about to learn that I didn't get where I was by being naive or defenseless. After weeks of investigation, I had a complete picture of Jessica's deception and our family's unwitting participation in it. The scope of the betrayal was staggering, not just the financial manipulation, but the systematic character assassination that had poisoned my relationships with our parents for years. But knowledge without action is just impotent anger, and I was done being angry. I scheduled a meeting with my financial advisor, Tom, under the pretense of restructuring my investments. We'd worked together for 5 years, and he'd helped me set up the elaborate system that funneled money to my parents without their knowledge. He was one of the few people who knew the full scope of my secret generosity. "Tom, I need to discuss some changes to my family financial arrangements," I said during our Thursday morning meeting. "The current structure isn't serving its intended purpose." He pulled up my accounts on his computer, showing the automatic transfers that had been running like clockwork for over 3 years. "Are you looking to increase the amounts? Your income has grown substantially since we set this up." "Actually, I'm looking to eliminate them entirely." "All of them?" "Immediately." Tom's eyebrows shot up. "That's a significant change, Sarah." Your parents have been receiving about $4,200 monthly through various channels. Their lifestyle has probably adjusted to include that income. Stopping suddenly could create real hardship. I'm aware of the implications, I said calmly. But I've discovered that money is being used in ways that contradict my intentions. I need complete financial separation from my family while I reevaluate the situation. He walked me through the mechanics. The mortgage payments would stop within 2 weeks. The credit card payments would cease at the month's end. The investment return transfers would be the last to go, since they were quarterly, but I could halt the next scheduled payment in January. But stopping the money was just the beginning. I had a more sophisticated plan brewing, one that would expose Jessica's true character while giving my parents the way-up call they desperately needed. It would require perfect timing and careful orchestration, but the satisfaction would be worth the complexity. First, I needed to document everything officially. I hired a private investigator to create a comprehensive report on Jessica's financial situation, relationship history, and lifestyle discrepancies. Private investigators are expensive, but my consulting work had taught me the value of professional documentation when making serious allegations. The report would provide third-party credibility to my claims. Next, I needed to understand exactly how Jessica planned to maintain her lifestyle once the secret funding disappeared. Through some creative social engineering, basically, having friends of friends casually probe her social circle, I discovered she was already working multiple angles. She'd applied for several high-limit credit cards, was considering moving in with her latest boyfriend to cut expenses, and had floated the idea of our parents helping her buy a condo as an investment property. The timeline was crucial. Jessica's lease renewal was coming up in March, the same time my parents would start feeling the pinch from losing my financial support. She'd likely escalate her requests for help right when they discover they couldn't provide it. That convergence would create the perfect opportunity for revelation. But I wanted more than just financial consequences. I wanted my parents to understand how thoroughly they'd been manipulated and how wrong they'd been about both of their daughters. That required a more dramatic revelation, something that would force them to confront their assumptions all at once. The opportunity came when Mom called in early December to discuss Christmas plans. "We're thinking of doing something special this year," she said excitedly. Jessica suggested we rent a cabin in Aspen for the week between Christmas and New Year's. She found this gorgeous place that sleeps 8, perfect for family and guests. I almost laughed at the audacity. A week in an Aspen cabin during peak season would cost at least $15,000, money my parents absolutely didn't have without my secret support. Jessica was planning the most expensive family vacation in our history right as the funding was about to disappear. "That sounds lovely, Mom. Have you booked it yet?" "Well, we're waiting on the deposit. Jessica's handling the arrangements since she's so good at planning these things. We should have everything confirmed by next week." Perfect. Jessica was about to commit our parents to a financial obligation they couldn't meet, using money that wouldn't exist. The inevitable crisis would create exactly the opening I needed. I started preparing my revelation strategy. David and I decided to accelerate our engagement announcement, timing it to maximum impact. I also began reaching out to extended family members, laying groundwork for what was coming. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd witnessed years of Jessica's subtle undermining would need context to understand the full picture. The private investigator's report arrived in mid-December, professionally bound and devastatingly thorough. Jessica's financial irresponsibility was even worse than I'd suspected. Beyond the bankruptcy, she had a pattern of borrowing from friends and never repaying, accepting gifts under false pretenses, and using emotional manipulation to extract resources from anyone willing to help. Most damaging was evidence of her systematic campaign against me. The investigator had interviewed several family friends who confirmed Jessica regularly shared concerns about my personality, work habits, and life choices. She'd positioned herself as the worried sister trying to help everyone understand why I'd become so distant and difficult. But that's not even the most twisted thing I found out, and honestly, this is where the story gets really intense. You know when you think you've uncovered the worst betrayal, but then you find something that makes everything else look like child's play? That's exactly what happened next, and I promise you're not going to see this coming. If you're invested in this family drama and want to see how sweet revenge can really be, hit that like button because we're just getting to the good stuff. The way this all comes together is going to blow your mind, and trust me, the karma that's about to hit Jessica is more satisfying than anything I could have planned myself. Christmas morning arrived with fresh snow and family tensions I could practically taste. The Aspen trip had been confirmed, despite my parents' barely concealed anxiety about the cost. Jessica had handled all arrangements, assuring everyone that the deposit was secure and the balance could be managed through creative financing, a phrase that made my skin crawl given what I knew about the family's true financial situation. We gathered at our parents' house for gift exchange before the planned departure to Colorado. Jessica arrived with professionally wrapped presents that probably cost more than most people's entire Christmas budget. Designer scarves for Mom, an expensive whiskey for Dad, and for me, a condescending self-help book about work-life balance titled The Power of Presence: Finding Joy Beyond Professional Success. I thought this might help you explore some new perspectives, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The author talks about how career achievements can become barriers to authentic relationships if we're not careful. Mom practically glowed with approval. What a thoughtful gift. Jessica always knows exactly what people need to hear. I smiled graciously and thanked her, placing the book aside while internally marveling at her audacity. Here was a woman living entirely off other people's money, giving me advice about authentic living through a gift I'd essentially paid for myself. My presents were more modest, but meaningful. I'd gotten Mom a first edition of her favorite childhood book and Dad a vintage tool set he'd mentioned wanting. For Jessica, I'd chosen something special, a beautifully bound journal with a note that said, "For recording all your adventures and the people who make them possible." She flipped through the empty pages, looking slightly puzzled. "It's lovely, but I'm not much of a writer." "Oh, I think you might surprise yourself," I said. Sometimes documenting our experiences helps us see patterns we wouldn't otherwise notice. The conversation flowed normally until Dad brought up their financial planning. "We've been so blessed this year," he said, settling into his favorite chair. "Those investment returns have been incredible. Tom really knew what he was doing when he restructured our portfolio." Mom nodded enthusiastically. "It's amazing how compound interest works when you have good management. We've been able to help Jessica with some opportunities and still maintain our lifestyle. Financial security feels wonderful after those scary years." I watched Jessica carefully during this exchange. She knew our parents had been struggling before their mysterious financial turnaround, but she'd never questioned the source of their sudden prosperity. She'd simply accepted their ability to fund her lifestyle as natural and deserved, the way she'd always accepted their support. "It's funny how money works," I said casually. "Sometimes the source of financial stability isn't what people assume. Investment returns can be unpredictable, especially in volatile markets." Dad looked slightly concerned. "What do you mean?" Tom assured us our strategy was solid. "Oh, I'm sure it is," I said. "I just meant that financial situations can change quickly. It's important to have backup plans and really understand where your security comes from." Jessica jumped in with her usual confidence. "That's why diversification matters, right? Not putting all your eggs in one basket?" "I've been reading about investment strategies, and the key is having multiple income streams." The irony was suffocating. Jessica lecturing about diversified income while having no legitimate income at all. I decided it was time to start laying groundwork for what was coming. "Speaking of financial planning, I have some news that might affect our family's approach to money management," I said, reaching for David's hand. "David and I got engaged 3 weeks ago." The silence was immediate and total. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, Dad's eyes widened, and Jessica's face went through a series of expressions I couldn't quite read. "Engaged?" Mom finally squeaked. "Why didn't you tell us immediately?" "This is huge news." "I wanted to tell you at Thanksgiving, actually," I said, letting that sink in. But the conversation took a different direction, and it didn't feel like the right moment. The reminder of Thanksgiving dinner hit exactly as intended. My parents exchanged guilty glances, remembering their participation in Jessica's attack on my single status. The timing made their criticism look not just cruel, but completely uninformed. "Oh, honey," Mom said, tears forming in her eyes. "I'm so sorry about Thanksgiving. We had no idea you were seeing someone seriously. Tell us everything about David." I shared details about our relationship, our plans, and our timeline, watching my parents' excitement grow with each revelation. David was everything they'd claimed I'd never find because I was too career-focused. Successful but not threatened, supportive of my ambitions, ready for marriage and family. Their assumptions about my romantic prospects had been as wrong as everything else they believed about my life. Jessica's reaction was more complex. She congratulated me with appropriate enthusiasm, but I caught flashes of something else in her expression. Surprise, certainly, but also calculation. She was rapidly readjusting her mental picture of family dynamics, trying to figure out how my engagement would affect her position as the favored daughter. "This is wonderful news," she said finally. "I'm so happy you found someone who appreciates your intensity. It takes a special kind of man to handle a woman with such strong career focus." Even in congratulation, she couldn't resist a subtle dig. But this time, our parents caught it too. Dad frowned slightly at her tone, and Mom shot her a look that suggested she'd crossed a line. "David appreciates Sarah's ambition because he shares it," Mom said firmly. "That's what partnership looks like between equals." The shift in dynamic was subtle but unmistakable. My engagement had disrupted the narrative Jessica had carefully constructed about my life and priorities. Suddenly, her concerns about my work-life balance looked less like loving worry and more like unfounded criticism. But the real bombshell was still coming. As we prepared to leave for the airport, I made my final preparation for the revelation that would change everything. "Before we go," I said, pulling out an envelope I'd prepared, "I have something else to share. It's about our family's financial situation and some discoveries I've made recently." The room went quiet in a different way now. This wasn't the excited quiet of engagement news. This was the tense quiet of people sensing something serious was about to happen. "What kind of discoveries?" Dad asked, his voice carefully neutral. I took a deep breath, knowing that once I said the next words, there would be no going back. Our family would never be the same, but it was time for the truth to finally surface. "The investment returns you've been receiving for the past 3 years haven't been investment returns at all," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "They've been direct transfers from my personal accounts, designed to look like portfolio performance to protect your pride while ensuring your financial stability." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's face went white, Mom's mouth opened and closed without sound, and Jessica looked completely bewildered, as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. "What are you talking about?" Mom finally whispered. I pulled out the detailed statements I'd prepared, showing the trail of money from my accounts to theirs through various intermediary steps. Every mortgage payment, every credit card balance, every mysterious windfall that allowed you to help Jessica or take that cruise to Alaska, it all came from me. I've been supporting this family financially while watching you criticize my priorities and praise Jessica's balanced approach to life. Dad was studying the papers with the methodical focus of someone trying to make sense of an impossible puzzle. "These numbers. Sarah, this is over $150,000 across 3 years. $167,400 to be exact," I said. "Plus indirect support like gifts, meals, and expenses I covered during family events. I worked overtime, took on extra projects, and lived below my means so you could maintain your lifestyle and continue enabling Jessica's financial irresponsibility." Jessica finally found her voice. "Wait, you're saying Mom and Dad's money problems were fake? That they've been fine this whole time?" "No, Jess. Their money problems were very real. Dad lost his job, remember? Mom's library salary barely covered utilities. They were facing foreclosure until I intervened. The fake part was letting you all believe they'd somehow recovered through smart investing instead of acknowledging that their supposedly selfish, career-obsessed daughter was keeping the family afloat. The implications were hitting everyone at different speeds. Mom was crying now, understanding immediately how wrong they'd been about everything. Dad was still processing the numbers, his engineering mind trying to reconcile the data with his assumptions about their financial recovery. But Jessica's reaction was the most telling. Instead of gratitude or embarrassment, her primary emotion seemed to be anger. "Why didn't you tell us?" she demanded. "Why make it some big secret instead of just being honest about helping?" "Because I knew exactly what would happen," I replied. "You would have treated it like another entitlement, another source to tap without consideration or gratitude. Instead of examining your own financial irresponsibility, you would have just adjusted your expectations to include my support as a given." "That's not fair," Jessica protested. "I would have appreciated it. We all would have." "Really? Let's test that theory." I pulled out the private investigator's report. "In the past 3 years, while I was secretly funding this family's stability, you received $47,000 in direct transfers from our parents. Money that ultimately came from me. You used that money for rent, vacations, shopping, and lifestyle maintenance, while contributing nothing to the family's actual financial security." Jessica's face was flushing red. "I pay them back when I can. And I contribute in other ways, emotionally and socially. Not everything is about money." "You're right, not everything is about money. So let's talk about the other ways you contribute." I opened to another section of the report. "Like how you've spent years systematically undermining my reputation with family friends, positioning yourself as the concerned sister worried about my workaholic tendencies and emotional unavailability." Mom looked shocked. "Jessica would never do that." "Mrs. Patterson from next door was very chatty with the investigator," I continued. "Apparently, Jessica's been sharing concerns about my priorities for years. How I've become obsessed with money and status. How she worries I'm losing touch with what really matters. How she tries to help you understand why I've become so distant and difficult." The color drained from Jessica's face as she realized the scope of my investigation. "You hired a private investigator? That's insane, Sarah. That's paranoid and vindictive." "Is it? Because the investigator also documented your bankruptcy 3 years ago, the one you never mentioned to our parents. And your pattern of borrowing money from friends and never repaying it. And your credit card debt that's currently maxed out across 7 different cards despite having virtually no income." Dad was staring at Jessica now with an expression I'd never seen before. "You filed for bankruptcy? When?" "It wasn't a big deal," Jessica said defensively. "Lots of people have financial setbacks. I got back on my feet." "With our money," Mom said quietly, the pieces finally clicking together. "With Sarah's money, filtered through us because we thought we could afford to help." The room's energy was shifting dramatically. The careful roles everyone had played for years, Jessica as the balanced, emotionally intelligent daughter and me as the successful but cold workaholic, were crumbling under the weight of documented evidence. "There's more," I said, though part of me wanted to stop here. But they needed to understand the full scope of Jessica's manipulation. "The Aspen trip you've planned for this week? The one Jessica organized? It costs $18,000 for the week, plus flights, food, and activities. Money you don't actually have because I stopped all financial transfers 3 weeks ago." The silence was absolute now. Even Jessica had stopped protesting, finally understanding that her carefully constructed house of cards was collapsing completely. "The deposits have already been charged to your credit cards," I continued. "Cards that were only manageable because I was paying them off monthly. Without my support, you're looking at immediate financial crisis, and Jessica's expensive vacation planning just accelerated the timeline." Dad was holding his head in his hands. "Jesus Christ. How did we get here?" "You got here because you chose to believe Jessica's version of reality instead of paying attention to what was actually happening," I said. "She painted me as selfish and money-obsessed while living entirely off money I earned. She criticized my life choices while making catastrophically poor choices of her own. And you enabled it because her narrative felt more comfortable than acknowledging your own financial dependence." Mom was crying harder now. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. We've been so wrong about everything. About you, about Jessica, about our situation. How do we fix this?" That was the question I'd been hoping to hear, because despite everything, I still loved them. But the answer wasn't simple, and it definitely wasn't going to be comfortable for anyone involved. Fixing this starts with Jessica taking responsibility for her choices and their consequences, I said, looking directly at my sister. And it starts with all of you understanding that my success and generosity were never the problem. Your assumptions and entitlement were. Jessica was quiet now, finally grasping the magnitude of her situation. Without my secret funding, our parents couldn't continue supporting her lifestyle. The Aspen trip was about to become a financial disaster that would expose just how precarious their situation really was. Her carefully maintained image as the balanced, life-smart daughter was in ruins. I think, Dad said slowly, we need to cancel the trip immediately and figure out how much damage we're looking at. Actually, I said, I have a different proposal. Jessica organized this expensive vacation using money she knew you didn't have, banking on resources she'd never contributed to. I think she should take full responsibility for the financial consequences. Jessica's eyes widened. What does that mean? It means the trip expenses are entirely yours to handle. Deposits, cancellation fees, whatever penalties come from backing out last minute, that's all on you. You made commitments using other people's money without their informed consent. Time to learn what that actually costs. I can't afford that, Jessica protested. You know my financial situation. I know it very well, which is exactly why you shouldn't have been making $18,000 commitments on behalf of others. Figure it out the same way you've figured out everything else, through creativity, hard work, or accepting the consequences of poor decisions. Mom looked torn between protecting Jessica and acknowledging the justice of my position. Sarah, maybe we could work out some kind of payment plan. No, I said firmly. This is exactly the problem. Jessica creates messes and everyone else cleans them up while she learns nothing. She needs to handle this herself completely. David, who'd been quietly supportive throughout this confrontation, spoke up for the first time. What Sarah's proposing isn't cruel, it's accountability. Jessica's an adult who made adult decisions. She should face adult consequences. The next few hours were a masterclass in family dynamic reversal. Instead of me being lectured about my life choices, Jessica found herself trying to explain years of financial irresponsibility and emotional manipulation. Instead of our parents praising her balanced approach to life, they were questioning how they'd been so blind to her actual character. The immediate aftermath was brutal for Jessica. She had to call the Aspen rental company and explain the situation, accepting full liability for the deposit forfeiture and cancellation fees. She had to contact friends and extended family who'd been invited, admitting that the trip she'd organized was financially impossible. Most devastatingly, she had to confront the reality that without my secret support, her lifestyle was completely unsustainable. But the psychological reckoning was even more significant. Our parents were forced to acknowledge that everything they'd believed about both their daughters was wrong. I wasn't a cold workaholic who'd chosen career over family. I was someone who'd sacrificed personal comfort to ensure family stability while keeping quiet to preserve everyone's dignity. Jessica wasn't a balanced, emotionally intelligent daughter who enriched their lives. She was a financial parasite who'd manipulated their emotions to maintain her access to resources. The role reversal was so complete it gave me whiplash. Suddenly, Mom was asking about my work with genuine interest instead of barely concealed concern. Dad was praising my financial wisdom and asking for advice about their budget. Jessica, meanwhile, was fielding questions about her life plans, her career prospects, and her timeline for financial independence. I think Mom said during one particularly difficult conversation, "We owe you a tremendous apology. Not just for the money, though that's overwhelming to think about, but for not seeing who you really are and what you've been doing for us. And for believing Jessica's narrative about your personality and priorities," Dad added. "We should have trusted our own observations instead of accepting someone else's interpretation of your character." Jessica's attempts to defend herself only made things worse. Every explanation revealed more entitlement, more financial irresponsibility, more manipulation. When she claimed she'd always planned to pay our parents back eventually, Dad pointed out that her bankruptcy meant she'd legally eliminated debts without repaying them before. When she insisted her concerns about my work habits came from love, Mom noted that love doesn't usually involve subtle character assassination with neighbors and relatives. The Aspen cancellation alone cost Jessica $6,400 in non-refundable deposits and fees. Her credit cards, already maxed out, couldn't handle the additional burden. She was forced to borrow money from friends, sell belongings, and eventually take a second job waiting tables to manage her obligations. For the first time in her adult life, she was facing the actual cost of her financial decisions without family bailouts. But the real justice wasn't financial. It was social and emotional. Extended family members who'd heard years of subtle criticism about my life choices were now getting the full story. Cousins, aunts, and uncles who'd accepted Jessica's narrative about my workaholism and emotional unavailability were learning about my years of secret generosity and her systematic manipulation. The family gossip network that had once carried Jessica's concerns about my priorities was now buzzing with a very different story. The successful daughter who'd seemed cold and distant had actually been supporting everyone while the fun, balanced daughter had been bleeding the family dry through emotional manipulation and financial irresponsibility. My engagement announcement, perfectly timed within this context, became the final proof of how wrong everyone had been. David wasn't just successful and supportive, he was exactly the kind of partner that proved my approach to life had been working all along. I hadn't chosen career over relationships. I'd built a career that attracted high-quality relationships while secretly supporting family members who were criticizing my choices. 6 months later, the family dynamic had completely transformed. Jessica was working 2 jobs, living in a much smaller apartment, and actually contributing to family dinners by bringing homemade dishes instead of expensive store-bought items she couldn't afford. Our parents had restructured their budget based on their actual income and were learning to live within their means. Most importantly, they'd all learned to see me as I actually was instead of through Jessica's distorted lens. Mom started bragging about my achievements to friends instead of downplaying them. Dad asked for my professional advice and actually took it. Jessica, humbled by her financial reality check, stopped offering unsolicited life advice and started asking genuine questions about career development and financial planning. The transformation wasn't just about money or family dynamics, it was about truth finally surfacing after years of careful manipulation. Jessica's sweet life built on other people's resources and subtle character assassination had crumbled completely, while my supposedly cold, career-obsessed existence had been revealed as the foundation keeping everyone stable. Now, looking back on that devastating Thanksgiving dinner and everything that followed, I realize it was the best thing that could have happened to our family. The cruel comments that hurt so much in the moment were actually the catalyst for exposing years of hidden dysfunction and manipulation. Sometimes the most painful truths lead to the most necessary changes. David and I got married 8 months later in a beautiful ceremony that my parents helped plan and Jessica attended as a genuinely supportive sister, finally understanding what family loyalty actually looks like. We're planning to start our own family soon, and I know our children will grow up understanding that success and generosity aren't character flaws, and that true family support flows both ways. The sweetest part of this entire revenge story? Jessica recently thanked me for forcing her to face reality. She's in therapy now, working on the entitlement and manipulation patterns that nearly destroyed our family. She has a steady job, a realistic budget, and for the first time in her adult life, genuine self-respect based on her own achievements rather than other people's resources. Sometimes the best revenge isn't hurting someone. It's forcing them to become the person they should have been all along while claiming your rightful place in the family you've been supporting from the shadows. So here's my question for you. Have you ever discovered that family members were living completely different lives than what they presented to everyone else? Have you experienced that moment when someone's carefully constructed image crumbles and reveals who they really are underneath? I want to hear your stories about family karma, workplace justice, or those satisfying moments when truth finally wins over manipulation. Drop your experiences in the comments below. The messier and more dramatic, the better. And if this story resonated with you, smash that like button because it helps other people find these real-life revenge stories. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell because I share stories like this every week. Tales of justice served, karma delivered, and people finally getting what they deserve. Whether it's workplace drama, relationship betrayals, or family secrets exploding, there's something incredibly satisfying about watching manipulators face consequences for their actions. Share this video with anyone who's dealt with entitled family members or financial manipulation. Sometimes people need to hear that it's okay to set boundaries and demand accountability, even from family. And remember, success isn't something to apologize for. Generosity shouldn't be taken for granted, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is force someone to face the truth about their choices. Thank you for joining me on this wild journey of family drama and sweet, sweet justice. Life has a funny way of balancing the scales eventually, and sometimes the best thing you can do is just make sure you're standing in the right place when karma finally shows up to collect what's owed. Until next time, keep standing up for yourselves, setting healthy boundaries, and never let anyone convince you that your success makes you the villain in their story of entitlement and poor choices.